Namaste, good morning, and welcome to our class on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Om Sarva Jiva Papanashakaranam Bhaveshwaram Swikritam cha garbhavasa deha pashamidrisham Yapitam svalilaya cha yena divya jivanam Yapitam svalilaya cha yena divya jivanam Tannamami Deva Deva Ramakrishnam Ishwaram Om Shri Vivekanandari Satchishya Supujitaya Shri Sharada Devya Virata Sevitaya Shri Ramakrishna Paramahamsaya Avatara Varishtaya Chate Namaha. We salute Sri Ramakrishna, God of gods and Lord of existence, who of his own free will took on human birth and lived a luminous life of divine play for the destruction of human ills. We salute that incarnation of God, Paramahamsa Ramakrishna, who was worshipped by pure-hearted disciples like Swami Vivekananda, who was ceaselessly served by Sri Sarada Devi, the Divine Mother herself. Om Tavakatamritam Tapta Jivanam Kavibhiriditam Kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Shrimadatam Bhuvi Grinanti Ye Bhurida Janaha. O Lord, your nectar-like words are praised by the wise and full of auspiciousness. They destroy the curse of evil, bring good to those who hear them, and bring new life to those who are scorched by the ills of worldly existence. Magnanimous indeed are they who spread your message. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Om peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So this morning we will continue our study of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, where we left off, and that is on page 277 near the bottom, and this is on August 19th, 1883, which was a Sunday, and so a number of devotees were able to come and attend. This was just after, in that year, it fell just after the Shravani Purnima, the full moon of the month of Shravan. The Jnani, Sri Ramakrishna speaking, the Jnani seeks to realize Brahman, but the ideal of the bhakta is the personal God, a God endowed with omnipotence and with the six treasures. Yet Brahman and Shakti are in fact not different. That which is the blissful mother is again existence, knowledge, bliss absolute. They are like the gem and its luster. When one speaks of the luster of the gem, one thinks of the gem, and again, when one speaks of the gem, one refers to its luster. One cannot conceive of the luster of the gem without thinking of the gem, and one cannot conceive of the gem without thinking of its luster. And so here, Sri Ramakrishna had been speaking about the Jnani, the seeker of the knowledge of Brahman, one who seeks to know one's identity with Brahman and to merge into Brahman, to become Brahman. So he says that the Jnani seeks to realize Brahman, but the ideal of the bhakta is the personal God. That is the Lord of the universe, Ishvara, the Lord of existence, the personal God to whom we can relate. And as I have said on other occasions in other talks, on various other subjects, there is no relationship with Brahman, because Brahman is reality itself, the impersonal absolute. It's beyond personality. It's not below personality like a rock or a stick. They have no personality because they are below the personal. But Brahman is beyond all ideas of personality, and it's the non-dual whole, the one without a second. And so where is their relationship? And within Brahman, there is no ignorance, and so there is no world in Brahman. And so we can't pray to Brahman, we can't relate to Brahman, we can't think that I am a friend of Brahman or I am the lover of Brahman, because with Brahman there is no relationship possible. But Ishvara, the personal God, is that same reality in relationship to the universe. And so when you have a universe with its living beings like you and me, then you have Ishvara. So Ishvara is the way that Brahman appears when you have a world. When you have a world and Brahman within the world. So Sri Ramakrishna is saying that the bhakta doesn't seek identity with Brahman. The bhakta seeks to know the personal God, to enter into relationship with the personal God. And as he says, a God endowed with omnipotence and the 6 treasures. I don't remember all of the 6 treasures, but the word Bhagavan, which is one of the many words in Sanskritic languages for God, for Ishvara, but Bhagavan means one who is possessed of, Van, one who is possessed of, Bhaga, the 6 treasures, the 6 treasures, or the 6 powers of godliness. And so it includes lordliness, that is the omnipotence, lordliness, the power of control of the universe, and other omnipresence and other powers of God. So God is defined as the one who is possessed of these 6 lordly attributes. And so that is the one that we seek to relate ourselves to. If we seek self-knowledge, if we seek to know that I am Brahman, aham brahmasmi, soham, I seek to know myself, then the questions of relationship to God and devotion and all of that don't necessarily come up unless we combine it with devotion. But in the path itself, they don't come up. But most people follow the path of devotion, and that's true all over the world. Even in religions like Buddhism, where the religion itself is impersonal and there is no God, there's not even a soul. And yet the common Buddhists, their religion is very much involved with worship of the Buddha. So devotion is seen even in impersonal systems to be dominant. Even among the Jainas. Jainas don't believe in God either, as the Buddhists don't believe in God. The Jainas do believe in the self, the soul, the individual self. They don't believe in Brahman, the over self, as it's sometimes called in English, the universal self, but they do believe in the individual self, and that self is spiritual by nature, and that realization is to realize one's own self as the center of reality. But among Jainas also, the religion is focused, much of it is focused on worship of the Tirthankaras, the great 24 great saints of Jainism, the 24 greatest saints of Jainism who established the religion. Most of them are like many of the Buddhas. Most of them are not historically known. It's only the last of them that were historically known, the Buddha and the Tirthankaras. So we see that devotion is natural to the human spirit. Even in a religion which takes away God and takes away soul, finds a way for devotion to be expressed. I remember beautiful passages in a book called The Way of the White Clouds by Lama Anagarika Govinda. He was a German who came to the East in his youth back in the first half of the 20th century, or late first half, maybe around the 1950s, in fact. So maybe the middle of the 20th century. He came to the East to study Buddhism, and he ended up deciding to go to Tibet to study Mahayana. And there he tells of this one person he met in one of the monastery temples there, whose whole life was full of devotion for Tara, the Tibetan bodhisattva, Tara, who is the patron deity of Tibet, and how he would polish the floors of the shrine as part of his daily devotion. And so you read in texts of Tibetan Buddhism, and even in Theravada, which is much more austere, even there you read of the devotion to the Buddha. And again, in Mahayana, including Tibetan Buddhism, there were various Buddhas and Bodhisattvas that were worshipped, not just the historical Buddha. And so you even have schools of devotional Buddhism in Japan and China and Korea. So again, Sri Ramakrishna says that the bhakta has as his ideal the personal God, Ishvara, or Bhagavan, possessed of the six treasures, the six powers of lordliness. And then he goes on, yet Brahman and Shakti are in fact not different. So here we see something that was extremely important to Sri Ramakrishna, and he always emphasized it. Sri Ramakrishna never failed to emphasize that Brahman and Shakti are the same. Why did he spend so much time emphasizing that? I think the reason was that Sri Ramakrishna's philosophy was comprehensive. It could neither be totally identified with and limited by traditional Advaita, nor certainly could it be limited by the devotional schools of India. And so he always emphasized that both are the same reality and both are real, ultimately real. That in Advaita Vedanta, traditional Advaita Vedanta, yes, a place is given to Ishvara. Ishvara is accepted, the existence of Ishvara is accepted, but only provisionally. When one realizes Brahman, then Ishvara disappears. And so Ishvara is an appearance that comes along with the appearance of the universe. And when we overcome Maya, then Brahman, Shakti, or the creative power, that disappears with the disappearance of the universe. And so it can't be real, according to Advaita philosophy. And so Ishvara is only provisionally real, which means it's not really real at all, if it's only provisionally real. So Brahman alone is the reality. And so Sri Ramakrishna never denied the reality of Brahman, and that Brahman was the ultimate. He never denied that. But he did always emphasize that Shakti also is real. The creative power of Brahman is real, and he would use various illustrations to express that. And these are traditional illustrations, like fire and its power to burn, or here he uses the illustration of the gem, the jewel. The gemstone has luster, and that luster is inextricably a part of the gemstone itself. And so the gemstone is like Brahman, and the luster is like Shakti. You can't think of the gemstone without thinking of its luster, and so you can't think of Brahman without thinking of its Shakti, the divine creative energy out of which this universe has come. Now, the Advaitins emphasize Brahman alone as real, and Ishvara as a provisional reality. And then the devotional schools, they tend to deny Brahman altogether. They say that there is no Brahman separate from Ishvara. Ishvara is the highest reality, And when the scriptures speak of Brahman, they mean Ishvara. They're not speaking of something else, something higher than Ishvara. They just mean Ishvara. So Sri Ramakrishna didn't accept that either. Sri Ramakrishna accepted the full absolute reality of Brahman. But he said that the creative power is inextricably associated with Brahman. And so he always insisted that that both are real. The Gaudiya Vaishnavas, like the followers of ISKCON, Krishna consciousness, they have a unique way of speaking about Brahman and Ishvara. They say, of course, that Ishvara means Krishna, not any other deity. Shiva and other deities are minor deities. Krishna alone is the Bhagavan Swayam, the Lord himself. The reality itself is Krishna, not other deities. And they say that the followers of the impersonal path, the followers of the path of knowledge, they are mistaken because they see the light coming off of the divine body of Krishna, and they are so bewitched by the beautiful light coming off of the body of Krishna that they forget about the real essential reality, which is the form of Krishna. And they go after this light, which is just something that's coming off of the body of Krishna as a byproduct of Krishna's glory. And so they say that the followers of the path of knowledge, that first of all, they're atheists, as they call them, because they seek the impersonal and not Ishvara, and that they are deluded because they are following after the light coming off of Krishna's body while they ignore the supreme reality, which is the divine form of Sri Krishna. So that's from a Advaitic standpoint, that's a very strange doctrine. But Sri Ramakrishna denied both, the Gaudiya Vaishnava view and also the Advaita view. The Advaita view that Brahman alone is real and Ishvara is a temporary appearance. When we see this world, we see Ishvara, but that all disappears in Brahman. And he also denied the Vaishnava view and most of the devotional schools in India, their view, that the impersonal reality doesn't exist, that there's only Ishvara. And that for the seekers of Brahman, that they are deluded because they're seeking the light coming from Krishna's body. No, he never accepted either of these views. So Brahman, the absolute, beyond time, space, and causation, is real. That's what the jnanis seek. But most people, again, follow the path of devotion because we are in our ordinary lives, and most of us are ordinary people leading ordinary lives. We are in our ordinary lives relational beings. We relate to everything. This is mine, that's yours. These are my people, those are your people. This is where I'm from. So we are spending our whole lives in a relational universe. And we are spending our whole lives in a personal universe. We relate to persons in a way different from things. And so we are used to relating to persons. We are always relating to something or another, persons or things. And we are always dealing with subject-object relationships. I being the subject and everything else being object, and relating myself to the objects. And so bhakti accepts all of those things. A relational universe where I relate myself to Ishvara, to God. I relate myself to the world also, but in devotion, I learn to relate myself to the world through God. Vedanta says, give up relation altogether. Give up objectivity altogether. Give up the subject-object idea altogether. So it denies from the beginning everything that our life is founded on. But devotion accepts what our life is founded on. It just takes away, it just substitutes a much, much better object of our focus from the paltry objects that we have been focusing on. It says to focus on the reality which is Ishvara. And Sri Ramakrishna says Ishvara is the reality. Ishvara and Brahman are the same reality seen from different perspectives. And so instead of focusing on objects of the world, focus on God. And when you have to deal with objects in the world, deal with them as related to God, that everything here in the universe is made by the creative power of God. Everything here is related to God. To relate myself to God, relate everything here to God. God is the divine object. I'm the subject, God is the divine object, but a special object, an object which is the eternal subject. God is my own internal, innermost self, closer to me than my individuality. And so God is the antaryami, inside of me, inside of my consciousness. My consciousness itself, my individual consciousness, is a spark of God's consciousness. So God is the vast, and I am the spark of that vast ocean of consciousness. So again, it accepts the relational universe where I relate to things. It accepts the subject-object relationship, and it accepts the personal aspect of life, where I, as a person, relate to God as a person. And so Sri Ramakrishna says that both are true, Brahman, the Absolute, and Ishvara. So, and again, the idea of the gem or the idea of fire. Just as fire and its power to burn cannot be separated, if you think of one, you have to think of the other. Or the gem and its luster, you can't think of one without thinking of the other because they're inextricably intertwined. We can only separate them by an act of mental abstraction, the burning power and fire, or the gem and its luster. We can only separate the two by an act of mental abstraction, but in reality, the two are inextricably one. And so Sri Ramakrishna always said, again, that Ishvara and Brahman are the same. There's a large academic book, but a wonderful book written by Ayan Maharaj. Now he has become Swami Medhananda, on the philosophy of Sri Ramakrishna, published by Oxford University Press. And there he goes into depth discussing the philosophy of Sri Ramakrishna and comparing it to other philosophies, including and concentrating on various Western philosophies. So going forward with the gospel, existence, knowledge, bliss absolute is one and one only, but it is associated with different limiting adjuncts on account of the differing degrees of its manifestation. That is why one finds various forms of God. The devotee sings, "O my divine mother, thou art all of these." Wherever you see actions like creation, preservation, and destruction, there is the manifestation of Shakti, that is the divine creative power. Water is water, whether it is calm or full of waves and bubbles. The Absolute alone is the primordial energy, which creates, preserves, and destroys. Thus, it is the same captain. Again, in his audience, we saw last time, was seated Captain Vishwanath Upadhyay, an official with the government of the government of Nepal. Thus, it is the same captain whether he remains inactive or performs his worship or pays a visit to the Governor General, that is the British Governor General of British India. Only we designate him by different names at different times. Captain, yes, sir, that is so. And so here, so a beautiful illustration that just as Captain Vishwanath Upadhyay, whether he's sitting idle doing nothing, or whether he's working, whether he's doing his puja, because he was famous for doing his worship. Every day he would worship the Shiva Lingam. Or whether he's going to visit the Governor General of India. It's the same captain in different guises, but the same person. And so it's the same reality. Whether we think of it as Brahman in its absolute nature beyond time, space, and causation, or as Ishvara, Lord of the universe, whether we think of it as the creator of the universe, the preserver of the universe, or the destroyer of the universe, it's the same reality in its different guises. And he gives the beautiful example of water the water of the ocean, when it's the waves, the bubbles, all of that is nothing but water. And so they're the still depths of the ocean. And then there's the surface of the ocean where there are waves and bubbles and so forth. But it's all water. It's all ocean. For those, if any of you have been scuba diving, that's a interesting experience you have when on the surface, which I've had on the surface, there could be stormy waters with large waves and so forth, and you dive down to 80, 100 feet. You don't even have to go that far, 40 feet down and deeper. Then you find the water is perfectly still. You don't even know that on the surface there's a storm raging. And so the depths of the ocean are silent, but the surface of the ocean is lashed into waves and ripples and bubbles and so forth. But it's all water. So Brahman is the reality, whether it's in creative action as Shakti or whether it's the impersonal absolute. So the masters, after saying all of this about Shakti and Brahman being non-different, that is, Brahman and the creative power being non-different, then the master says, I said those words to Keshab Sen. And that, of course, we know Keshab from many places in the gospel. Captain. Keshab is not an orthodox Hindu. He adopts manners and customs according to his own whim. He is a well-to-do gentleman and not a holy man. So Captain was very critical of Keshab, as you can see here, because Captain was an Orthodox Hindu who did his puja every day, who believed in the deities and so forth. But Keshab was highly westernized in his tastes and in his thinking and his religion. And so the Brahmo Samaj, as we know, was a highly westernized form of Hinduism. That is, they thought of it as a purified form of Hinduism, Hinduism which had been purified from all of its so-called superstitions by making it come into conformity with Unitarian Christianity, and but still retaining the idea of Brahman. That's why they're called the Brahmo Samaj, the society of the followers of Brahman. But again, it was only loosely connected to Hinduism, and it denied many of the aspects of traditional Hinduism. So Captain had no use for him. So Master to the other devotees, after Captain said that critical thing about Keshab, Captain forbids me to go to Keshab. Captain, but sir, you act as you will. What can I do? So Captain doesn't deny that he tells Sri Ramakrishna he shouldn't go to Keshab, but because he's not a holy man and he's not a follower of the Sanatana Dharma, etc. So Captain doesn't deny it, but he says, oh, what can I do? You do whatever you want to, no matter what I say. So this was too much for Sri Ramakrishna. So he says sharply. Again, the master loved the captain, and he often refers to him, and even when captain is not there, he often mentions him and so forth. So he had great love for him, as he had great love for Keshab. But when Keshab says this, the master says sharply, why shouldn't I go to see Keshab? You feel at ease when you go to the Governor General's house. So the Governor General was an Englishman, and for an Orthodox Hindu, to associate closely, like going to the house or eating with, socializing with a non-Hindu was polluting. And so here, Captain is telling Sri Ramakrishna he should not go to Keshab. So Sri Ramakrishna says to him sharply, but you feel at ease when you go to the Governor General's house. Keshab at least is a Hindu, the Governor General is an Englishman. And for money at that is, you go to the Governor General, don't feel any difficulty with that, and you go to him for money. Keshab thinks of God and chants his name. Isn't it you who are always saying that God himself has become the universe and all its beings? Doesn't God dwell in Keshab also? So again, Sri Ramakrishna also loved Keshav very deeply, and so he couldn't take sitting down the captain's denigration of Keshav because he was not orthodox in his habits. So Sri Ramakrishna pointed out, how orthodox are you? You go and associate with the Governor General. He's an Englishman. You say that Keshav is not a Orthodox Hindu, but the Governor General isn't even a Hindu at all, and you feel quite at ease associating with him, and you go to him for money. Do I go to Keshav for money? You go to him to line your pockets. And so Sri Ramakrishna points out his hypocrisy. With these words, the master left the room abruptly and went to the northeast veranda. Captain and the other devotees remained, waiting for his return. M accompanied the master to the veranda where Narendra was talking with Hazara. Sri Ramakrishna knew that Hazara was always indulging in dry philosophical discussions. Hazara would say, "The world is unreal, like a dream. Worship, food offerings to the deity, and so forth are only hallucinations of the mind. The aim of spiritual life is to meditate on one's own real self," unquote. Then Hazara would repeat, "Soham, I am he." But with all that, he had a soft corner in his heart for money, material things, and people's attention. So Sri Ramakrishna realized Hazara's hypocrisy also, that no one could hide such things from Sri Ramakrishna. And Sri Ramakrishna smiled and said to Hazara and Narendra, "Hello, what are you talking about?" Narendra smiling, "Oh, we are discussing a great many things. They are rather too deep for others." The master with a smile, "But pure knowledge and pure love are the same thing. Both lead the aspirants to the same goal. The path of love is the much easier." Narendra then quoted a song, "O mother, make me mad with thy love. What need have I for knowledge or reason?" That is a song which supported what Sri Ramakrishna said. So you see the difference that the time had made with Narendra, where coming into association with Sri Ramakrishna, this liberality was coming. So he, of his own accord, quotes this song. Narendra said to him that he had been reading a book by Hamilton, who wrote, "A learned ignorance is the end of philosophy and the beginning of religion." That's a very famous statement by the British thinker Hamilton, that a learned ignorance is the end of philosophy. That is, philosophy takes us as far as a learned ignorance. It takes us as far as agnosticism. I don't know. And that is where religion picks up. So master to M. What does that mean? Because Narendra turned to M and he would have said that in English. The end of philosophy, or the learned ignorance is the end of philosophy and the beginning of religion, in English, which the master couldn't understand. So Narendra explained the sentence to the master in Bengali. The master beamed with joy and said in English, "Thank you, thank you." Everyone laughed at the charming way he said these words. They knew that his English vocabulary consisted of only half a dozen words. So every now and then in the gospel, we find an occasion when Sri Ramakrishna says one or two of those half dozen words that he knew in English. But of course, when we read this, that everyone laughed at the charming way he said the words, we have to remember that this should be sort of in the background of our mind as we read the gospel, that everything that Sri Ramakrishna said was filled with the charm of his being. Even when he spoke sharply to Captain and scolded him and pointed to his hypocrisy, after Captain had been posturing about Keshav's worldliness. Even after the master scolded him, pointed out in front of everyone, the captain waited there quietly for Sri Ramakrishna to return from the veranda because of the charm with which he said everything and the love that was behind even his rebukes, even when they were sharp. And so when we read the words of someone like Sri Ramakrishna, when we read anyone's words, we read them with the context of our own mind being the only context for understanding that we have. And so we read the words of others in our own voice, as we would say and as we would react to things. So we have to remember, no, that's not the way. Sri Ramakrishna didn't say things the way that we say them. They didn't have the effect that our words have. If we insult somebody or if we point out somebody's hypocrisy, we may destroy a friendship. And the person may just point out our own hypocrisy. But with the Sri Ramakrishna, people like Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda, the Holy Mother, the effect of their words was very different because everything they said was inspired by, colored by, full of the spirit of their being, which was a being which wished well to all, and which, when it was sharp and when it was critical, when it scolded, it was with the view of removing a blindness from the person. So it was almost dusk when most of the devotees, including Narendra, took their leave of the master. Again, this was Sunday, and so by Sunday evening, people began to return home. Sri Ramakrishna went out and looked at the Ganga for a few minutes from the west porch. That's the little, for those of you who have been there, it's the little circular porch on the western side of the building. Two priests were bathing in preparation for the evening worship. Young men of the village were strolling in the garden or standing on the concrete embankment, gazing at the murmuring river. Others, perhaps more thoughtful, were walking about in the solitude of the Panchavati. So again, M draws a picture for us so that we can relive the atmosphere that this took place in. It became dark. As Sister Nivedita points out, for those of us who grew up in the Western non-tropical countries, that is, in the outside of the tropics, in the tropics, day turns into night and night turns into day relatively quickly. It doesn't turn on a dime, but dusk is short because the sun is traveling directly over the tropics, or almost directly over, within the two lines of the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. It travels close to overhead all year round. And so the difference between day and night is short, whereas in the outside of the tropics and the further towards the polar regions you go, then the more the sun is traveling at an angle. And so evening and morning junctures of day and night are very long. I remember even in a place like Atlanta, Georgia, I still remember as a kid, the long evenings when the sun would begin to go down and the light would get less, and it would go on for a long, long time, the evening, in the especially in the summertime. And so here, people began to leave because it was dusk, and soon it was actually night. So it became dark. The maidservant lighted the lamp in Sri Ramakrishna's room and burnt incense. The evening worship began in the 12 temples of Shiva and in the shrines of Krishna and Kali. As it was the first day after the full moon, the moonlight soon flooded the tops of the trees and temples and touched with silver the numberless waves of the sacred river. The master returned to his room. After bowing to the Divine Mother, he clapped his hands and chanted the sweet names of God. A number of holy pictures hung on the walls of his room. Among others, there were pictures of Dhruva, Prahlada, Kali, Radha Krishna, and the coronation of Rama. The master bowed low before the pictures and repeated the holy names. Then he repeated the holy words, Brahma, Atma, Bhagavan, Bhagavata, Bhakta, Bhagavan, Brahma, Shakti, Shakti, Brahma, Veda, Purana, Tantra, Gita, Gayatri. Then he said, I have taken refuge at thy feet, O Divine Mother. Not I, but thou. I am the machine, and thou art the operator, and so on. So Sri Ramakrishna, oftentimes we see in the evening, when includes it in his narration, Sri Ramakrishna would do this. He would repeat various names of gods and goddesses, and then he would repeat these trinities. Some of them are trinities. The first ones are trinities, and then some others that are not. But Brahma, Atma, Bhagavan. When he would repeat a trinity like that, what he meant was that these are all the same reality. Brahma meaning Brahman, not Brahma, Chaturmukhi Brahma, the creator, not the deity Brahma, but Brahman, and the Atman, the self, and Bhagavan, God. They're all the same reality. So Brahman, the absolute, the Atman, my own self, your own self, and God, the worshipful God, they're all the same reality. And then he would often say, as he says here, Bhagavata Bhakta Bhagavan. Bhagavata, the scripture, Bhakta, the devotee, and Bhagavan, God, are the same reality. And you remember the vision he had outside of the Vishnu temple one day when he was in front of the Vishnu temple. There was a Pandit seated reciting from the Srimad Bhagavatam in a book holder in front of him. He was seated cross-legged in front of the temple reciting, and Sri Ramakrishna saw a light come from the image inside the temple, which was the image of Krishna, Radha Krishna, but the light came from Krishna, Vishnu, landed on the text, and then from the text went to the heart of the Pandit. And Sri Ramakrishna realized in that moment that the God, the scripture, and the devotee are the same reality. So you may say, well, how does just seeing a light, that could mean anything. There are all kinds of things that I can think of that meaning. It may be God inspired the scripture, and then the scripture inspires the devotee. So why does Sri Ramakrishna assume that it means what he did assume? Oh no, in a vision, one of the qualities of a real vision is that it's not just seeing something, like something, as I often give the example, of seeing something that's made in Photoshop, created something. No, it's not just seeing three things: the image, the book, and the pundit, and then a light hitting him, and then you have to figure out what that means, and you try to interpret it symbolically, like you try to interpret dreams that you see. No, a real spiritual experience conveys its meaning. It conveys the meaning along with the experience. So the important thing that Sri Ramakrishna saw was not the fact that there was a light that touched these three manifestations. It was the fact that he realized in that moment the unity of God, the scripture, and the devotee. So he would often say, Bhagavata Bhakta Bhagavan. And then he goes to this pair, Brahma Shakti, Shakti Brahma. The Brahman and its power, and the power and Brahman are the same reality. And then he mentions the major scriptures, the Veda, Purana, Tantra, Gita, Gayatri. So that was his evening devotion. Did he need to do that? No, for Sri Ramakrishna, he was always immersed in the thought of God. Everything reminded him of God. But everything Sri Ramakrishna did was for the welfare of others, for the inspiration and education and training of others. And so in the evening, he would always recite these things. And that is a lesson to us that sort of thing is a very good practice. And it's good to verbalize things sometimes. I don't mean your mantra, that you don't verbalize out loud so that people can hear it. You never tell your mantra to anyone. But other things like chanting the names of God, saying something out loud to God, speaking out loud to God. Again, not for in front of other people so that people think you're holy. No, these things should be done in privacy. Sri Ramakrishna, there was no privacy for Sri Ramakrishna, and he was beyond the need for privacy. For us, we should do things quietly so that we can be sure for ourselves, for our own sake, that we're not doing it just to show off to people that we're so spiritual. But again, the practice of every day bowing to whatever sacred pictures you have, or every time that you pass by them, thinking, being conscious of the fact that, oh, I'm passing by you. I offer my salutations because you are my refuge. And every day saying things that are meaningful to us, like Sharanam Dehi, Sharanam Dehi, Sharanam Dehi, give me refuge, give me refuge, give me refuge. Pahimam Nityam, Pahimam Nityam, Pahimam Nityam. Sustain me always. Rakha karo, Rakha karo, Rakha karo. Protect me, protect me, protect me. If we just think things in sort of a casual fashion, it doesn't affect us as much as if we actually express it, both physically by our gesture and by our voice. And so that is why Sri Ramakrishna would say out loud the names of the gods, say out loud Brahma, Atma, Bhagavan, Bhagavata, Bhakta, Bhagavan, etc. While the master was meditating in this fashion on the Divine Mother, a few devotees coming in from the garden gathered in his room, and again it was night at this time. Sri Ramakrishna sat down on the small couch. He said to the devotees, Narendra, Bhavanath, Rakhal, and devotees like them belong to the group of the Nitya Siddhas, that is, the ever-perfect. They are eternally free. Religious practice on their part is superfluous. Look at Narendra. He doesn't care about anyone. One day he was going with me in Captain's carriage. Captain wanted him to take a good seat, but Narendra didn't even look at him. He is independent even of me. He doesn't tell me all he knows, lest I should praise his scholarship before others. He is free from ignorance and delusion. He has no bonds. He is a great soul. He has many good qualities. He is expert in music, both as a singer and as a player, and is also a versatile scholar. Again, he keeps his passions under control and says that he will never marry. There is a close friendship between Narendra and Bhavanath. They are just like man and woman. Narendra doesn't come here very often. That is good, for I am overwhelmed by his presence. So think of these things that Sri Ramakrishna said of Swami Vivekananda, that someone like Sri Ramakrishna, an avatara, the God in human form, who came in human form, speaking of someone like Narendra in these terms, and says that it's good that he doesn't come here often because when I see him, I'm overwhelmed. Praising him like he praised no others. And this is just one instance. There's so many things that he said about Narendra, like those who come here, meaning his own many of his own disciples, they're like 2 petal lotuses, 8 petal lotuses, at the most 16 petal lotuses, but my Narendra is 1,000 petal lotus. That is, that there was no compare between Narendra and others. And so extraordinary things that he says. He says that Narendra, Bhavanath, Rakhal, and devotees like them belong to the group of the Nitya Siddhas, the ever-perfect. So Bhavanath is not usually included among the 6 Ishvara Kotis. Sri Ramakrishna used to say that among his disciples there were 6 Ishvara Kotis, those who are eternal associates of Ishvara, eternally perfect. They're eternally associated with God. They never fall into ignorance. They're born only for a divine purpose. And so you'd say Narendra, Swami Brahmananda, let's see, Swami Vivekananda, Swami Brahmananda, Swami Premananda, Swami Niranjanananda, Swami Yogananda, and Purna, the householder devotee. He would say that these 6 are Ishvara Kotis, but here he includes Bhavanat as one of a special class of the ever-perfect, the Nitya Siddhas. And so this that he says that he doesn't care about anyone. One day he was going with me in Captain's carriage. Captain wanted him to take a good seat, but Narendra didn't even look at him. Now that is very impolite. So why is Sri Ramakrishna praising Narendra's impoliteness? The captain offered him a seat, and the least Narendra could have done was to say, "Oh no, thank you. That's all right. I'll sit here. I'm fine." Narendra didn't even look at him. No, Sri Ramakrishna knew that Narendra's behavior came from something else. There are other examples of Narendra's not caring anything for social niceties. Various examples are there. But Sri Ramakrishna knew that that was because Narendra had no attachment to the world whatsoever. He says here that he is free from ignorance and delusion. And so his ignoring of the captain was not because I don't like captain and why is he bugging me? Why is he asking me to take a nice seat? To hell with him. I don't care about these things. Just leave me alone. No, it wasn't that. It was that he had no regard for these things, no regard for people's attention. He says, Sri Ramakrishna says he even disregards me sometimes. He's independent even of me. He doesn't tell me all that he knows because lest I should praise his scholarship before others. When Sri Ramakrishna would praise him, Narendra would scold him for praising him in front of others, and scold him for loving him so much, saying that you're too attached to me, always thinking about me. People will think that you're mad. Why should you? I'm just Narendranath Datta. Why are you going on about me like that? And when he would praise Narendranath and say that he was far, far greater than Keshab, Narendra would say, Keshab is world famous, and I'm just a student. I'm just Narendranath Datta that nobody knows. Why do you go on exaggerating like that? So Narendra, the source of his behavior, Sri Ramakrishna knew. Other people didn't always understand. So it's not that Narendra's behavior was obvious to others. Swami Sardananda, before he became Sardananda, when he was Sharat, when he saw Narendra at a friend's house, he was put off by Narendra's behavior and thought that, I heard that my friend had turned to bad behavior. It's probably because he's been associating with this young man who is obviously no good, meaning Narendra. And so Narendra's behavior was misunderstood by many, but Sri Ramakrishna understood the source of it, that he was udasina, indifferent to everything. So Swamiji himself later used to say, first be a gentleman, then be a sadhu. First be a gentleman, then be a sadhu. And later Swami Madhavananda, who became one of the great presidents of the order, the 9th president of the order, he used to say the same thing, emphasize the same thing. So it wasn't that Narendra was modeling bad behavior that we should follow. No, again, Narendra's came from something that we don't have. And so consideration for others, all of these things is very good. Those are things that we should cultivate. We shouldn't try to imitate Narendra, because his mind was in a different place. Think of it. Sri Ramakrishna says that he's not subject to ignorance or delusion. Think of that. When we take up our own spiritual life and we read something like that, we think that, okay, I'm going to be the same. And then after 50 years, we find, my goodness, it's not so easy. Swami Adbhutananda, Latu Maharaj, when they were still both Latu and Narendra living with Sri Ramakrishna, Latu Maharaj saw that by this time they were in Kashipur, taking care of Sri Ramakrishna. Latu Maharaj saw that Narendra was speeding ahead on the spiritual path, fast ahead of everyone, even fast ahead of Swami Brahmananda. And so Latu Maharaj said, well, I'm going to catch up with him. that youthful competitiveness, a good competitiveness. He said, I'm going to catch up with Narendra. So he began to meditate more and more. And he said, speaking figuratively, he said, after meditating very hard for a long time, and he meant over a number of days or weeks, he said, I opened my eyes and saw Narendra had gone even further. So I decided, okay, I will meditate even harder. And so again, I immersed myself in my spiritual practice. And after some time, I opened my eyes and saw that he was gone far ahead. And then I realized I'll never catch up to him. So that was Narendra. So we'll stop here. And next time we will begin on the next day, which was Monday, August 20th. So I'll give announcements, and then if there are questions, I will try to answer those. So for announcements, now it is Thursday, and once again, I realize now that it's time to announce them. I haven't come up with topics for May. So again, there is a lecture on Sunday, and it will be on a topic, but, and we will send it out before Sunday. But that's all that I can say for now. However, we will have Sunday lectures as usual through the month, and then Tuesday and Thursday classes will be as usual. The Tuesday class on the Upanishads at 7:30 in the evening, and this class on Thursdays at 11 o'clock in the morning. So that will continue. And we are still hoping. We're not making any promises, so we're not going to allow you to sue us if we don't do it. But it's not a promise, but we're still hoping that we can open in some form to in-person classes sometime in June. Even the Hollywood Center, which has been very careful about COVID, they are opening to a limited audience in June. So we'll figure out the mechanics and let you know. We may allow a fixed number of people that people have to call and sign up for a particular class or lecture for coming in person. That we haven't decided that I'm just mentioning as a possibility. But we'll decide the mechanics of it. But we hope to have some form of in-person classes and lectures starting in June. So now for questions. I have difficulty interpreting what Thakur means when he says, and I paraphrase, God manifests at different levels with the greatest manifestation through his incarnation. Isn't God the same everywhere? So yes, God is the same. God is eka rasa, one reality. But manifestations are many. Manifestations. There's Ganesha, there's Sita, there's Rama, there is Shiva, there's Vishnu. And in another sense, everything here is a manifestation of God. Everything is a manifestation of God. So at the level of the relative universe, there's only differentiation, and there is difference. And so, yes, in one sense, the same reality of God is everywhere. But as a manifestation, again, he's talking of manifestation. As a manifestation, there are greater and lesser degrees of manifestation. Just as we find that there are greater and lesser saints. There are some saints who are very saintly, but they lead a quiet life and just lead their devotional life, their meditative life, and then they quietly die and they're gone. There are other saints who transform many, many people, who transform society. So there are different manifestations of saints, and there are even different manifestations of the avatars, greater avatars and lesser avatars. Those who have a greater effect on the world and those who have a lesser, those who liberate many more people and those who liberate lesser. And so the idea of the incarnation being the greatest manifestation, he means manifestations like visible manifestations like deities. That the incarnations are even greater than the deities, greater than Shiva, Vishnu, etc. That the incarnation incarnates from the very heart of God. And so the incarnation is the manifestation of the heart of God and a manifestation of the grace of God. the grace-giving aspect of God. And so in that sense, the incarnation makes God visible, makes God visible. They are not different than the deities, Shiva, Vishnu, etc. And yet they make God visible. And they make God visible in time and space, in history, living among human beings. And so we see them, we talk to them. We read about Shiva, we read about Vishnu, etc., but we see the incarnation. We interact with the incarnation. We interact with the deities through worship, through bowing down and so forth. And maybe a rare person, and not maybe, but the rare person does have a vision of the deity, but they have a vision and then the deity disappears again. But the incarnation is, so it's not that there are, within the being of God, there are differences. It's differences in manifestation, that is, in our perception, what it means to us. Can we keep the sacred images in a secret place in our bedroom to avoid the rest of the family to criticize? Yes, certainly. And that we advise people to do. If people in your family or people who come to your house are critical of such things, then don't expose yourself or the pictures to the criticism of others. So, like here in the West, many of us come from Christian or Jewish homes. And if we have a shrine with pictures of Sri Ramakrishna or Shiva and Kali and such images like that, or Ganesha, the elephant-headed Ganesha, and such on our shrine, people seeing it will criticize us and also criticize the altar. And there's no need to put oneself into a situation where oneself and one's sacred images are criticized by others. So you can keep them in a box that at time of devotions, you open the box and you can see them, or in a chest. You can keep them in a closet. Wherever people are not likely, the public, including family, the non-sensitive family or family that's not sensitive to such things, where they won't see it. So that's perfectly legitimate and it should be done. The idea in early Christianity of wanting to be a martyr for God and always looking for a chance to get killed for the glory of God, that God bless the martyrs who did that, but God doesn't call on us to do that. There's not a value in getting martyred just because I want to advertise the fact that I believe in Hindu deities and let the whole world kill me, but I'm going to show it to everybody. No, there's no value to that. So no, you certainly should be circumspect. Love that Ramakrishna saw Narendra's true motives. Yes. I wish that I could give up my desire for recognition and praise. Yes, we all wish that. We all wish that. That's a hard one, but we can gradually get over it. We can gradually get over it. But it takes time. And so with prayer, with analysis of ourselves, self-analysis and so forth, and prayer and worship, gradually we can overcome it. So we should be patient with ourselves and patient with our faults, because we were not born as Narendra was born. We're born from the other side of the spectrum, trying to go in that direction. So we have to be patient with our weaknesses, not patient to the point where we just say, well, I accept them and I'm happy to have these weaknesses. No, patient, knowing that it takes time to transform them, but they will be transformed. They will be transcended and transformed. We can be sure of that. So let me give the closing chant. Om Niranjanam Nityam Anantarupam Bhaktanukampa Dhrita Vigraham Vai Ishavataram Parameshamidyam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namama. We bow in adoration to Sri Ramakrishna, who is stainless, eternal, infinite, the worshipful Supreme Lord who took human birth out of compassion for all. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Om peace, peace, peace be unto us all. Oh, you didn't turn off this yet? No, but it's still going.